Well, folks, hello and welcome to another fucking fantastic RfRx. My name is Eric Wells, and I am the support group director. And with me, as first time co-hosting RfRx, is Trent Emery, helpline agent. How are you doing, Trent?
Doing it very well, my friend. Thank you very much.
Good, good, good. Well, like at the beginning of every single RfRx, we have a poll, and today is no different. Today's poll questions are 3 of them, each one with the answer of yes, no, or I'm not sure. So the first question is, did humans evolve to consume and metabolize drugs of abuse? Second question is, are humans designed to search, consume, and utilize alcohol? Now, when you see the word design, you can also think of the word evolved. I think that would be a more appropriate word. Question number 3, are all humans vulnerable to substance abuse? And keep in mind, again, the answers to select from are yes, no, or I'm not sure. So that poll will be running while we do this whole introductory part. And we'll wrap it up once we start to read our guest's bio. Well, folks, this is RfRx, and let me tell you, RfRx is awesome. It's a great way to spend here in the US or the Western Hemisphere to spend a Monday evening. And here at RfRx, we bring on guests and experts to discuss the topics that are really relevant to the folks who come to Recovering from Religion. Now, this isn't at all a replacement for the online community or for the support groups or for the helpline at all, but instead, this is kind of a complement to that. Folks who come to RFR, like myself and possibly like you, struggle with so many different issues, and we want to bring on the guests who can talk to those issues. They provide some great coping skills and fantastic advice. So if you have any suggestions of guests or questions or comments or inquiries or even death threats, you can send them to us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And all of our past RfRx shows have been recorded and are up on our YouTube channel. And you can find those at youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion. So we've thrown around the initialism RFR quite a bit just in the first couple of minutes that we've been talking. RFR stands for something, stands for Recovering from Religion. And here at Recovering from Religion, we have a mission. And our mission statement is to offer hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. So you can see there's those 3 different types of categories, and we have quite a few services, quite a few programs that surround and take care of and pursue the mission that we have. So the first one on healing, we have the helpline. And the helpline is where we have folks, volunteers, incredible volunteers called agents that are trained to listen to you with an empathetic ear, with no judgment and no criticism at all. They're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, either through the chat on our website, recoveringfromreligion.org, or through a phone call. You can actually call and talk to a human being. And in addition to that, we have gathered a crap load of resources, probably a lot more than the metric crap load that the folks in the rest of the world are used to. Because here we just have got the imperial system of crap load measurements. But take a look at all of those resources. They are so awesome and really well curated. I think that you'll find something will be able to help you in that list of resources. In addition to that, we have got hope. That was another part of the mission statement. And the hope comes from where we can share and listen to personal stories. Folks, we are really all in this together. As far as I'm concerned, this is all that I've got. I don't have anywhere else to go after this life. And so if I can share my story, if my story helps someone out in a tough time that they're going through, if it brightens up that light at the end of the tunnel, then that's perfect. That's exactly why I'm here. And we do that, not just me. It's not like I do all these articles. There's a ton of different people out there who are sharing their stories on our blog, medium.com/excommunications. The excommunications blog is the RFR blog, and it's fantastic. I suggest you take a look at some of those articles that are up there. And the podcast, A lot of the old episodes, they actually have some stories from folks too. The new episodes are of all the RfRx. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a link into the chat for those two as well. Trent, man, I have been talking my butt off and I've got to go pick it up off the floor. You mind taking over the support side of RfR?
I got you, Eric. So the last point here on what RfR provides is support. And I think it's one of the most important ones and why we exist as a community. And so we have several different ways that we support people who are struggling with these kinds of issues. And one of them is peer support groups. So we have face-to-face meetings in person. And, you know, Eric, you can probably clarify, I don't know if the COVID protocols with those still, but I'm sure we're doing everything that we possibly can to maintain everyone's safety, health throughout this challenging time. But there are face-to-face meetings. We, of course, have this group here as well. There are 64 groups around the world, and we're looking for even more of those. And so you can find the nearest one to you at the RfR website, which is going to be linked in the chat. And then the next methodology of support is the Secular Therapy Project, which I'm proud to say and happy to say that I actually was a participant of. And these therapists are licensed secular mental health care providers, and we help you get connected with one of them. And they're wonderful. You won't find any of the woo, you won't find any, well, maybe God can help you, guide you through this sort of thing. It's all science-based research, and they will, you know, take your circumstances and provide you with the best care imaginable for that. So along with that, it's very carefully screened for licensure in their state and or the country. As I said, there's no proselytizing. It's all secular and evidence-based treatments. And so the website for that is also going to be linked in the chat. It's seculartherapy.org. And then we have the online community. So we have online platforms to help meet people and connect people with similar backgrounds, very much like this event that we're having tonight. I've met so many wonderful people, and I recognize so many friendly faces just from having done the social hour host here. And I think that a lot of the people there have gotten to know each other very well and stayed connected. So we have Sunday night Zoom meetings, and you can join and contact our helpline agents, of course. And so we also have the atheist community of Discord. So if you guys are familiar with Talk Heathen or the Atheist Experience, you'll also be familiar with this link, also going to be put into the chat. And it's just, again, a lot of different chat threads that you can follow, anything that you're interested in, dive in there, have some discussions, meet, you know, some like-minded people and enjoy yourself there. And then lastly, we have what we're doing here, which is volunteering. And so I've experienced this myself. Healing can come from helping other people. You know, a lot of the times I've felt like I've solved some of my own problems just by helping other people who've had those same problems. So volunteering is a really great feeling. It's a great thing. And what you're doing is very much worth your while. You find meaning and purpose in your life for doing so. And so we're always in need of volunteers. If you have any time whatsoever to spare and you're passionate about this stuff, please consider volunteering for us. It's a wonderful organization. I can speak that from the heart and honestly. And so go to recoveringfromreligion.com, or excuse me, .org/volunteer. That's also going to be in the chat. And Eric, I'm going to swing it back to you.
Sounds good. Excellent job, Trent. I appreciate that. Just
thank you.
Perfect. Well, folks, we have done the intro part, and let's go ahead and tell you what you can expect from us tonight. Firstly and foremostly, I want to let you know that if you are hearing impaired, we now have live captioning, closed captions, and subtitles available for RfRx. And you can take a look at the live transcript button, I think somewhere around your window, and turn those on so you can kind of, and I looked at them and it did pretty decently as far as I'm concerned. I mean, yeah, there was some mistakes and all, but for the most part, if I spoke clearly, it did pretty darn good. So if you are hearing impaired, take a look at those closed captionings. We're going to have a discussion with our fantastic guest, Dr. Andy Thomson, and he's going to present to us a really, really cool talk. I've got to see a sneak peek of the slides, and it's fascinating stuff. During that talk, you probably are going to have some questions. I know that just seeing some of those, I had some questions. So please type it in the chat. You can either send them to me in a private message or just send them into the chat in general. And that goes for you too, Atheist Community of Discord, because I know you're streaming this show over there. And if you got some questions, go ahead and write those in there. So during that second part of the show, we will be having a Q&A session. That's about 20 or 30 minutes or so. Once that's all done, we are going to hear from a new person that you may not be aware of, is a incredible person and a great part of, invaluable part of recovering from religion. Phil Sessions will be coming on and giving his closing thoughts as a board member for RFR. So, and then after that, we're going to close the recording off and do our world famous hangout, where you get to hopefully ask our guests some questions and just hang out and say hi to everybody. So without that, without me going on much longer, Trent, why don't you introduce us to who we're meeting with today?
Yes, sir. I have also seen Andy's talks, and they are wonderful. I am in awe at the intelligence of this man. Dr. Andy Thomas is a psychiatrist at University of Virginia Student Health Services. The 9/11 attacks triggered an interest in suicide terrorism, which led to the discovery of an unappreciated world of research into how and why human minds generate religious beliefs, something I've also been tremendously fascinated in. Andy has written, quote, "Why We Believe in Gods, a concise guide to the science of faith," unquote, which brings that world to anyone interested.
So Dr. Thompson, welcome, my friend. I'm so glad you're here with us today.
Let me get my slides going here. Okay. Thank you so much for having me again. Thank you, Eric, for organizing this, and welcome everybody. The next time that you go outside and look at the Milky Way, I want you to think about it differently. I want you to think about it as the Milky Way Bar and Grill. It turns out that our universe has billions, literally billions of liters of alcohol, ethyl alcohol, methyl alcohol, vinyl alcohol. And the alcohol tends to be close to where new stars are forming. And in our galaxy, it is the Milky Way that is full of booze. And it is thought that comets brought alcohol to the surface of the Earth, and it may be that alcohol was crucial to the very formation of life. And there may have literally been an alcoholic haze surrounding Earth for several millions of years. So you can make a case that we may owe our existence in part to alcohol. And I want to start this story tonight at a little bit different place, a little closer to home, Dayton, Tennessee, because we're approaching now the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial in 1925. And for those of you who remember the history, William Jennings Bryan, the former Secretary of State and presidential candidate, prosecuted John Scopes. John Scopes was charged with violating the Butler Act, which was you can't teach, wasn't evolution, you can't teach human evolution. And Scopes had done that, and defending him was Clarence Darrow. And it was one of the most famous trials. And even though Clarence Darrow called Bryant as a hostile witness, completely took him apart on the stand, exposed his foolish fundamentalist belief, do you believe Jonah stayed in the belly of the whale? Despite all of that, Scopes was convicted. But the reason I bring it up is because few people realize that after the Scopes trial, even though evolution was in textbooks, after that point in time, the textbooks publishers basically said, we're out of here. And evolution slowly fell away from being included in textbooks. Even the first woman governor of Texas instructed teachers, I think it was, to take scissors and cut out the parts in the textbooks that had evolution. And it got to the point where evolution literally disappeared from the textbooks. I want you to look at this quote, which is from 1941. Do you want me to read it? Would you like to read it, Eric?
I'll be happy to read it. So from Riddle in 1941, biology is still pursued by long shadows from the Middle Ages, shadows screening from our people, what is, or shadows screening from our people what our science has learned of human origins, a science sabotaged because its central and binding principle displaces a hollowed myth. That's, wow, that's great.
Yeah, and that's 1941. And then with Sputnik, there was a pushback for more science education, including biology and evolution. But even despite that, as you know, it was a real fight. And from that period on, it has been an uphill battle to get evolution taught even in high school biology textbooks. There have been 19 federal cases. And as you know, it's still a struggle. And one of the outgrowths of that is that we don't have basic education of evolution in biology for your standard high school student going into college. The basic Darwinian natural selection, the modern Darwinian synthesis is not taught. And why is this important? Because it sheds light on all of biology, it sheds light on psychology, and as I hope to show you tonight, sheds light on substances. And what is my goal tonight? My goal is to really do a sort of a deep Darwinian dive into substance use. And I think, or at least I hope, you will see that if you start to apply the basic principles of evolutionary biology, it opens up a completely different understanding of substance use and substance abuse. Let me give you a little bit of a roadmap. I've never met a slide I didn't like. Bear with me. This is going to be a bit of a road trip, but I hope it's worth it. So sit back, light up, pop a beer and a glass of wine, and we'll roll down the road together. But you're going to hear about natural selection, sexual selection, but also something from evolutionary biology you might not be familiar with, life history theory, and something new called cliff edge selection. And I think all of these things help us understand substance use and abuse. I have no conflicts of interest. This talk is not being sponsored by Philip Morris or Anheuser-Busch or the California Weed Growers Association. Everybody knows the problems, the social problems we have with alcohol and alcoholism, and the busted relationships, the drunk driving, the cirrhosis, the medical illnesses, all the bad things that alcohol can cause, including bad tattoos and karaoke. But I hope to show you that it's universal for a reason. Now marijuana is legalized, and marijuana and cigarette smoking, nicotine, widespread. And one of the things I hope to show you is that, despite the damages they cause, there's a deep evolutionary reason that all of us are designed actually to take in these plant neurotoxins. They had an original evolutionary purpose that in some parts of the world are still crucial as antimicrobials, antiparasitics. Most of us forget the problem of cigarette smoking in the United States. 1 out of 6 Americans smokes. That's 68 million people. There are about 500,000 deaths a year in the United States from one of the cigarette-related illnesses. And in my business, we know that half of people with serious mental illnesses, your individuals who suffer schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, half of people with serious mental illness smoke, and half of those people will die of cigarette-related illnesses and will often die young. So I think everybody both has our own folk psychology explanations for why we abuse substances. This was Vincent van Gogh's. And in my profession, there are numerous theories about why we utilize substances. And my argument is that all of them are incomplete because they don't take a basic fundamental evolutionary perspective and start and go from there.
And Vincent van Gogh's theory, would you mind backing
Oh,
it up
I'm sorry. Vincent van Gogh's quote was, if the storm within roars too loudly, I drink a glass too many to stun myself. And the bottom line is, why would the consumption of potentially toxic substances be universal? Why is it part of human nature? And if it's part of human nature, evolution has to be involved. And as you think about it, these are deeply biological phenomena. We are consuming plant products. These are deeply biological experiences and phenomena. And as Dobzhansky once said, and I think it's one of the best quotes of all time, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. This is the standard view of evolution by natural selection, that a trait of an individual that augments survival and reproductive success is what goes into the organism. We now know you need to take Darwin, combine Darwin with Watson and Crick, genetics, and the basic modern Darwinian synthesis is that natural selection works at the level of the gene. And if you think about it, that's going to make sense, because what's the fundamental unit of life? It's DNA. Life, as the Les Murray, Australian poet, says it beautifully, life's slim volume spirally bound. And
Beautiful.
so that's where evolution acts. And so something that augments the genes is going to survive. So you can start to see, I hope, that if I abuse substances, and it may hurt me physically, it may damage my body, if it in some way augments the survival of my genes, the survival and reproductive success of my genes, that's all natural selection care about. I mean, it's not going to necessarily care about the cirrhosis that I may have from alcohol, or some of the lung problems from smoking cigarettes. If it in any way augments my survival, but crucially, reproductive success, the reproductive success of my genes, that's what counts. We see it in the pandemic. Darwinian fitness is not strength, it's reproductive success. So the genes in the coronavirus that mutated, that created greater infectivity and greater reproductive success for the coronavirus, those are the genes and the viruses that proliferate. The Delta variant, and I'm sure other variants that we've yet to see. It operates at the level of the gene. So that's the modern Darwinian synthesis. And some of you who've heard me before, I think have heard that. The main other point, first is modern Darwinian synthesis. The second is that we are risen apes, not fallen angels. And that the human evolutionary past is what is going to frame our experienced present. All of us carry the legacy of Lucy, of Homo erectus, Homo habilis. And you have to step back. I mean, even if you just take our genus alone, Homo, 2.4 million years ago, right? And for most of our evolutionary history, we lived in small hunter-gatherer bands on the savannas of Africa. Life was harsh. And it is here that we probably started to consume plant neurotoxins and develop mechanisms to control the blood levels of those plant neurotoxins, because as you'll learn, they were crucial to our survival. They were particularly effective at knocking off microbes, and particularly knocking off worms, worm infections, right? So again, a way to think about this is that for most of our evolutionary history, life was an endless camping trip with close relatives. This is shows the difference in the evolution of our brains. And Homo erectus, about 2 million years ago, us, one of our skulls. And I put this up here to draw your attention to the frontal lobe area. It is the massive evolution of our frontal lobes that is, what probably makes us unique. And we occupied what Steve Pinker calls the cognitive niche. We have extraordinary intelligence, language, and it's that frontal lobe. And what made us the most successful species and the last surviving hominid is that cognitive abilities, that cognitive niche, plus we are an ultra-social species. And one of the things that I hope to show you is that one of the byproducts of substance use was that it supercharged the limbic areas of our brain that helped us build social relationships. Something to always keep in mind when you're talking evolution is something called mismatch theory, the mismatch between the environment we evolved in and the environment that we now live in. the caption to this cartoon says, do you want to watch the hunting channel or the gathering network? And just some examples of mismatch. When you see a squirrel run in front of your car, it's going to be zigzagging because that's an ancient predator avoidance mechanism to get away from hawks and owls. Squirrels never evolved in a situation where they had to get away from cars. And the mechanism to avoid owls doesn't work against Buicks. The next time you go to McDonald's and get a McDonald's Big Mac meal, I want you to think of it as a monument to your Stone Age inheritance. We all have cravings for sweets, but it's the sweetness of ripe fruits. The modern world gives it to us in Coca-Cola, a super normal stimulus that just, supercharges the pleasure centers of our brain. We all have cravings for fat, but it was the fat of lean game meat. McDonald's gives us these fat-laden hamburgers, again, that just turn on our pleasure centers. And also, think about the environment we evolved in. Starvation was always right around the corner. Now we have plentiful foods, and we have plentiful foods that hijack our taste mechanisms and lead to heart disease, obesity, and all sorts of other things. And when we get into this, you'll see one of the things we now have are substances that are much more potent than the wild variety that we evolved utilizing. All right. One of the original theories, in a sense, evolutionary theories for substance use is the hijack theory. And what this means is that substances hijack areas of our brain originally designed for other purposes. Just like airplanes are designed to transport people, they're not, designed to be human missiles. And that and the idea was that substances hijack particularly our dopamine system. And the dopamine system, most of you know of, it's the pleasure centers in the brain. The VTA is ventral tegmental area. That's where your dopamine neurons are located, and it's in the brainstem, an ancient part of your brain. But as you notice, it has all sorts of connections to other parts of the brain, but particularly the frontal lobe areas. And we tend to think of the dopamine system as pleasure, but it's much, much more. Dopamine motivates attention. It motivates learning. It motivates motivation. The attention you're paying tonight, the learning you're doing, a lot of that is going to be marked by dopamine, your motivation for being here. Salience, the things you remember, will be marked by dopamine. Arousal and reward. Of course, that's one of the most important things. The dopamine system is the reward system. Wanting, decision-making, action selection. Sexual gratification is dopamine, but also particularly social relationships, right? And think about what often happens when we utilize substances. It generally increases our sociality and our enjoyment of sociality and bonding with people. And one of the other things I'm going to talk about is that there is a parallel between substance use and religion. Both serve to bond non-kin. Religion comes from religare, which means to bond. The other way to think about the dopamine system is it's the do it again system. Something is pleasurable, it motivates you to do it again. So it's the system. And one of the interesting things about the dopamine system is that it has no natural braking mechanism. So if you can take advantage of the dopamine system, you can create a runaway train very easily. And again, in ancestral environments, there weren't a lot of things that could give the kind of mammoth hit to the dopamine system that we can in the present with some of the substances we use. I want to show this slide, even though it's a busy slide, again, to help orient you to the dopamine system and substances. This is a neuron in the middle. The purple is a dopamine neuron. And I want to show you how central it is and the things that impact it. And we'll start up at about 12 o'clock. The GABA neurons are your mellow neurotransmitter. When we feel mellow, that's GABA. And you notice alcohol stimulates GABA and dopamine neurons. We have our own internal opioid system we'll talk about, our endorphins, and that impacts the dopamine system. Acetylcholine impacts the dopamine neurons, and that's facilitated by nicotine. Nicotine is a real hit on the acetylcholine dopamine connection. Serotonin, think Prozac, but also think LSD and your hallucinogens. Those are supercharging serotonin neurons, particularly in the visual cortex. Those are your hallucinogenic drugs. Alcohol also quiets glutamate, which is the excitatory neurotransmitter, anxiety, and alcohol calms that. And then where the dopamine neuron connects with the postsynaptic dopamine, if you look on your right about 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock on the slide, amphetamines work there, cocaine, cannabis. And so you can see that we've mapped out all the areas where the substances we utilize interact with the dopamine system. And I hope I've just shown you the centrality and the importance of the dopamine system. And again, you stimulate that system, there are no brakes, no braking mechanism. So dopamine system. Now, we've talked before about the centrality of attachment. Mary Ainsworth, a psychologist, John Bowlby, a British psychiatrist, mapped out the attachment system in humans. And the basic attachment system derives from the mother-child caretaking attachment bond. But it is that system that forms the basis of friendships, romantic partnerships, any kind of close, positive relationship you have with somebody. The basis of that is the attachment system of caretaking, of closeness, of trust. And this is the neurobiology of the attachment system. And again, it's a busy slide, but I put it up here to draw your attention to two things. The frontal lobe areas, that PFC, prefrontal cortex, NAC is the nucleus accumbens, the dopamine system, VTA, the dopamine system, and on the slice of the brain on your right, you see medial prefrontal cortex, orbital frontal cortex, OFC, that's the attachment mechanism, but also the limbic system. The part in the back is the limbic system, which is emotion. So you can see that the frontal lobe, we think about relationships, they're connected to pleasure, they're connected to mechanisms for attachment and trust, but they're also connected to the emotional limbic centers of our brain. And one of the main ones is the endorphin system. The endorphin system is our own internal morphine, and everybody thinks of it as for pain. It is much more than just pain. Endorphins are trust and bonding. If a friend of Eric just touches him and squeezes his shoulder, he gets a hit of endorphin, and his frontal lobe relaxes, and there's trust feelings. Just that very little bit. Endorphins are central. What does alcohol stimulate primarily? It's these mu opioid receptors. So one of the primary things that alcohol stimulates is this endorphin system, as do many of the others. But this is one of the reasons that we sit around with people and we drink, because it facilitates the emotions of attachment and bonding and trust. And
Dr. Andy,
please.
The mu, is this for it sounds like it's for a cat brain or something.
No, it's our brain too.
It's a Greek letter?
Yeah, it's the mu opioid receptors. And the mu opioid receptors in our brain are what our own internal, if you have an internal neurotransmitter in your brain, you're going to have receptors for that transmitter. So we have our own internal endorphin, and we have mu receptors for our own internal endorphin. So if I take opioids, those opioids go to those mu receptors, and I get a supercharged hit of, it's a supercharge of a system that's already in my brain. Mm-hmm. If you do heroin or opioids, that's a direct hit on those systems, on those receptors. And I love this. The dyad is the unit of the mammal. The idea that we're sort of the Marlboro man, the Lone Ranger, the lone individual, it's just nonsense. Okay, put that aside. I mean, we survived as a species because we're ultra social, and everything I'm telling you is something I learned from somebody else. And I love this
And
picture.
what is a dyad? I'm sorry.
A dyad is two. The dyad meaning two people.
Okay.
The dyad is the fundamental unit of the mammal. And we're an ultrasocial mammal, an ultrasocial hominid. And a lot of this is mediated, and I hope I'm starting to show you, with dopamine, endorphins, and some of the other chemicals that get stimulated by the substances we use. Martin Brunn is a brilliant German psychiatrist, I think makes a very good case that people who are experiencing opioid withdrawal, what you are seeing is basically unadorned separation distress. That's when people have severe opioid withdrawal. That is like, think of an infant who's been deprived of its mother. That's the severe separation distress. Now, another way of thinking about substance use is that we've got our cold calculating inner chimp, the cognitive part of our frontal lobes, our Dr. Spock. And we are also an ultrasocial, like a eusocial insect. And one way of thinking about substance use is that it tries to disable or reduce our Dr. Spock, our cold calculating parts of our prefrontal lobe, and stimulate our inner bee, our inner eusocial group-loving insect. And that it is this ultrasociality that has led to what is the crucial parts of our success, our ultra-cooperative nature, the creation of culture, the handing down of culture, our creativity. Think about all the creation that goes with groups of people. My iPhone was not built by one person. Think of all the people over all the years that did all the things that went into ultimately creating that iPhone. And so it is actually one of the cases I'm going to make is that crucial to that ultra cooperative nature to basically humans as the complex civilized beings that we are, a lot of that came from, a significant part of that came from our utilization of substances which augmented bonding. And because unlike insects, if you remember your biology, all the insects share genes, right? In a hive, they're all genetically related. But when we get together with a group, one of the problems that we had to overcome is creating ultra cooperation between non-kin, non-genetic relatives. And one of the things that facilitates that is substances. And it does that in part, again, by stimulating that limbic system that's sort of sitting behind the cortex, the prefrontal cortex. That limbic system is sitting there, and that's what has emotions that at times override some of our suspiciousness, our standoffishness, our calculations, calculating nature. And in a lot of cultures, you don't trust the guy that doesn't drink because he's not willing to loosen up, be vulnerable, and bond with you, be it if he doesn't drink or doesn't partake of whatever the cultural substance is. And obviously this goes along with other things that we've discovered that help with bonding. Humor, again, endorphins, telling stories, the upper right-hand corner, dancing, making music, not listening to music, but making music. But not just even dancing. Here's one experiment you can do sometime with somebody is, just sit with somebody and start tapping your feet together in synchrony. And just do that for a minute or two. And then notice if you experience any feelings that have shifted, any change that you've noticed, and any change in the comfort level or connection with the person that you were doing it with. There's great experiments that show, and when you set up an experimental paradigm where you're not tapping in sequence or not tapping at all, and tapping in sequence, and tapping in sequence, in rhythm, in synchrony, they've shown increased positive feelings, increased trust, increased connectedness to the other person. And so you can see all of these things are helped by substances we use, and the end product is that greater connection. And this is also true not just of alcohol, but of nicotine, of marijuana, of the other things that we use. And it stimulates these positive emotions. And a way of thinking about emotions is that positive emotions are fitness enhancing, negative emotions are things that are threatening to our fitness, reproductive success. But here's where it gets interesting, and particularly in the modern world where we have these really potent substances, because substances will enhance these feelings, but it can also give you what I think of as the Cayley mechanic. I used to use Sarah Sanders, but basically it gives you fake news, because you can have substances that give you false positive feelings. Think about it. If you've had a little bit too much to drink, you might think you're better looking than you actually are. You might feel like the person and the woman that you're talking to is interested in you, and which is the furthest from the truth. And then it also suppresses negative feelings. Think about the risk taking that goes along with substance use. So the substances can also create fake news that is actually, it can create feelings that are actually independent of an actual event. Think about it. I may start to trust somebody who maybe when I was sober, I wouldn't. You never know. But it bypasses mechanisms that signal real success or real threat, which can be risky and can have adverse consequences, but at times it can also have positive consequences. So again, drugs tend to trigger emotions that signal fitness, not necessarily happiness. And you want to keep that in mind. It signals that, this is a situation that may lead to reproductive success, directly or indirectly.
Yeah, so when you say fitness, you mean that in the evolutionary way?
Fitness, evolutionary way. In other words,
okay,
positive emotions are associated with events that generally led to reproductive success. So if my reputation has gone up, I'm going to feel a positive emotion. Okay, an enhanced reputation is usually, and all it has to do is on average be associated with more reproductive success than the not having that emotion.
I can recall a Jimmy Buffett concert in which I thought I was incredibly fit, but I did not end up being reproductively successful that concert. So I think I can completely understand what you're talking about.
But all it takes is one time. There's no such thing as a negative batting average. All it takes, if you're batting 1 out of 10, that's still 1 out of 10.
Well, thank you for that.
There wasn't there before.
I'll pat myself on the back.
But you can see, but you can see, but it's broader. Okay, if I start trusting somebody who I might not have trusted when I was sober, I might start trusting this person. I might start working with them. It might, it might enhance my life. And again, in Darwinian terms, all it has to do is enhance my survival and reproductive success. But it's not necessarily direct like sex per se, but it's anything that leads to enhanced survival and reproductive success. And as we'll see, in ancestral environments, utilizing nicotine and some of the plant neurotoxins actually augmented your survival. It killed parasites. And the longer you survive, the more reproductively successful you have a chance of being. So another concept I want you to sort of take in is something that's got a terrible name. It's called hormesis. And a way to think about this is to think of it as a Fitbit, meaning that our bodies are designed to actually have a favorable reaction to low doses of otherwise harmful toxins. As I'll show you, we're actually designed to take in these toxins to regulate their blood level because they were crucial. And it's the same with alcohol, it's the same with nicotine, with marijuana, with coca leaves, with all of the plant neurotoxins. And it has this odd name, hormesis. But what I'm going to show you is that we're actually designed to take in these substances to control the blood level because they were crucial to our survival. All right, let's go back, and I'm going to do it in two different ways here, and we'll go through it. We'll do alcohol first, and then we'll do the plant neurotoxins. So alcohol, 100 million years ago, the yeasts won the battle with the bacteria for ripe fruit. And the yeast won because they created alcohol and it killed the bacteria. So the yeasts took over ripe fruit, and they produced alcohol. And other animals evolved the ability to pick up on the scent of alcohol. Alcohol is a tiny molecule that disperses, and other animals picked up on that scent, and it signaled them for ripe fruit and consume the ripe fruit. When you go to the grocery store and take a fruit and you smell it for ripeness, what you're picking up on is alcohol. If it's putting out alcohol, you sniff that, and that tells you the fruit is ripe and you can eat it. Our monkey cousins can digest unripe fruit. We can't. We don't have the ability to digest the tannins on unripened fruit layers, the outer layers. And this is the simple mechanism that evolved in not just us, but other animals. We can take in that alcohol. We have an enzyme, alcohol dehydrogenase, that converts it to acetaldehyde. That's what makes you feel bad when you're hungover. And then we have a second enzyme, aldehyde dehydrogenase, that converts it to acetate. Think vinegar, and you excrete it. But it's that acetaldehyde that is what makes you feel bad with alcohol. Now, ripe fruit can have 5 to 10% alcohol, and we can handle that. But in the modern world, we get much more alcohol than we can immediately digest, and we wake up hungover with a lot of acetaldehyde. And here's something that I think is worth noting. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Sorry. So we may not be here if it weren't for the fact that about 10 million years ago, our last common ancestor with gorillas and chimpanzees developed the ability to metabolize alcohol. It's beautiful genetic work by a man named Kerrigan and some others. And about 10 million years ago, the earth was cooling, food was scarcer, vegetation was scarcer. Our monkey cousins could consume unripe fruit. And one of our ancestors developed the ability to metabolize alcohol. And so our ancestor could use ripe fruit as a food source. So alcohol became in and of itself a food source. Alcohol has like 7 calories per gram, and even glucose is like 5 calories per gram. So alcohol became a separate food source, and it was a signal that fruit was ripe. We could eat it. We could get the sugars of the ripe fruit, and we could also get the alcohol of the ripe fruit. And so it is this ancestor that we may owe our existence to this ancestor who was able to metabolize alcohol 10 million years ago. Now, here's the one thing that's interesting. Some of you may know people of Han Chinese descent who can't drink. They drink a little bit of alcohol and they get very uncomfortable and they get the Asian flush. And they have a genetic mutation, a couple of them, that they don't metabolize the acetaldehyde very well. So they get the alcohol, they convert it into acetaldehyde, then they can't break that down. And it's like they've got a miserable hangover that doesn't go away easily. They flush. Why did that evolve? And if alcohol is so terrible, why don't we all have that genetic variation? I mean, if alcohol is so terrible, I mean, wouldn't it be useful if we all, had it and couldn't stand drinking? Well, it looks like that variation, the acetaldehyde, is particularly toxic to Inamoeba histolytica, which is a common parasite in rice. And so this was a useful variation for these Han Chinese because it would help protect them from that parasite.
And when it says Asian flush, the flush is referring to the complexion after the drink.
Yeah,
like
look, this is the same man. So the on the left is normal. On the right is a picture of him after he's had alcohol, and he can't metabolize it. He can't metabolize it. He's got tons of acetaldehyde, and he's got the flush.
And he looks a lot, I don't know how to describe it, a lot more maroon, somewhat.
Yeah, I mean,
and then at the bottom is a picture of the actual amoeba.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you know some people who have this, I mean, drinking is miserable for them. Just a little bit of alcohol and it's awful because they can't break down the acetaldehyde. Now, that gets us to, did man once live by beer alone? And an anthropologist, Braidwood, originally postulated this in the 1950s based on some evidence. And the evidence really came in the late 1990s with the discovery of a place in Eastern Turkey, which I think you may have heard me talk about in one of my other talks. I would look up Göbekli Tepe. It's fascinating. And the importance of this discovery was that it had always been assumed that we didn't start growing grain until we had settled into being farmers. And that once we'd settled into being farmers, that's when organized religion evolved. And the importance of Göbekli Tepe is that in Eastern Turkey, they discovered this. It's a religious site, and it was before we had become farmers. It was before we had settled down into a pre-agricultural community. So we're still hunter-gatherers, and we get together in this area of what is Eastern Turkey, and it had, you can see they built monuments. I would encourage you to read about it. It's absolutely fascinating. But the importance of it, the archaeologic importance of it, one of the pieces of it is that it showed that we gathered in religious sites before we had left our hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But even more, they found these bins where people had been making beer from wild barley. Calcium oxalate in these vessels. I mean, these are like tubs where they made beer 10,000, 11,000 years ago. And it was part of religious ceremonies. And one of the theories is that we settled down into agriculture to brew better beer, not to raise wheat, and that the original bread, einkorn, was not for eating, it was to store the barley to make beer. And so the beer was crucial for a number of things. Remember, I mean, alcohol is great calories, number one. Number two, it loosens you up and helps people who are not related to each other to bond. It just like religion, it helps bond, and it's also antimicrobial. They don't have indoor plumbing at these places. People are exposed to a lot of toxic waste, fecal matter. And this is, as I'll show you, one of the important pieces of alcohol. And we now see these are alcohol vessels from China that are 8, 9, I think 10,000 years old almost. And so alcohol was brewed in China. And again, it's part of religious ceremonies. So alcohol and religion go back a long, long ways. And I hope you see some of the reasons. Now, people did not know it was alcohol. Keep in mind that we didn't actually know it was alcohol per se till the 19th century, but people had discovered through various culinary techniques that they could take honey and grain and fruit and these various things, and they could cook them in certain ways and do certain things, and they would have a liquid that would cause the pleasant effects of alcohol, which was reinforcing, obviously. But one of the crucial reasons, and the ultimate biologic reason probably, was that they were, as I'll show you, they were antimicrobial, antiparasitic. And then we get into mismatch theory. In the 3rd century, we learn how to distill alcohol, and get amounts of alcohol that, you know, easily overwhelm our ability to metabolize and detox it. This is just a summary slide to show you the effects of alcohol. So alcohol, the positive sign, alcohol stimulates the GABA system. Remember I talked about GABA system is what makes you feel mellow. You know, when you have a drink and you feel mellow, that's GABA. Your internal cannabinoids. So when you drink alcohol, you get a stimulation of your cannabinoids like you do when you smoke marijuana. Alcohol also blocks the negative sign, glutamate, which is the anxiety-provoking, excitatory neurotransmitter, and alcohol stimulates that endorphin system, those mu opiate receptors, bonding. And alcohol is antibacterial. Remember, it kills the microbes. The yeast knocked off the bacteria in ripe fruit. Well, alcohol kills bacteria, including our bacteria. It also activates our immune system, our immune T cells, which are crucial parts of our immune system. Roman legions, if you were a member of a Roman legion, every day you got a liter of wine. Crucial source of calories, crucial antimicrobial, and obviously it helps you bond with your fellow legionnaires. I love this example. So all of you familiar with Shakespeare's Henry V, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers, the Battle of Agincourt. Well, we wouldn't have had the Battle of Agincourt if it weren't for a surgeon named John Bradmore. And he was a surgeon and metallurgist who was in trouble with Henry because he'd been forging some coins. So he was sort of under house arrest. And at the Battle of Shrewsbury, King Henry got an arrow right into his zygomatic arch. So think about it, an arrow right into the bone below his eye, deep into that bone. And Bradmore broke off the shaft of the arrow. So he's got an arrowhead deep into the bone under his eye. And Bradmore and the surgeons at that time knew, I mean, they didn't know it was alcohol, but if they packed the wound with white wine and honey, it kept the wounds from deteriorating. I mean, obviously they didn't know infectious disease, but they knew that wounds would deteriorate and it would be terrible. And they could stop that deterioration with white wine and honey. And so Bradmore packed Henry's wound with honey and white wine to keep it from getting infected. And then he invented that little instrument on the left and was able to successfully pull the arrowhead out of Henry's below his eye socket, and he survived and it healed. And we have we few, we happy few, and Shakespeare's Henry V. So they knew that the substance in white wine and in fermented honey had medicinal benefits. We wouldn't have the rise of the great cities. Think about it. They didn't have plumbing if it weren't for alcohol. Alcohol protected you, or at least, you know, helped you survive the contaminated water that was everywhere. So the less water you drank, the less water you were exposed to, the more alcohol you had, the greater chance of survival. And also, I think you get along better with people living in close quarters. Alcohol also has cardiovascular effects. Obviously, it creates a positive mood. We know that alcohol reduces stress. We know it helps with sleep. We know it's an aphrodisiac. And obviously, I've been hammering the point, alcohol enhances social bonding. And notice half the people in this group are holding wine glasses, right? So alcohol is tremendous for social bonding, and particularly social bonding between non-kin. This is also interesting. Let's say, God forbid, one of you has a heart attack tonight. What's the greatest predictor that you will be alive 1 year from now? You've had a heart attack. What's the greatest predictor that you'll be alive 1 year from now? Interestingly, it's not giving up smoking. That's number 2. It's not taking your medicines. Actually, the number 1 predictor for being alive is the number and quality of your friendships. Right? So that's another benefit of alcohol potentially. I find that, and the research has been repeated, but the best predictor of 1 year survival of a heart attack is your friendship network.
So are you linking the number of friends that you have to drinking alcohol? Like
Yeah. And there's studies
Okay.
on that too. The people that don't drink and drink alone, you know, don't have as many friends. But and there's a English psychologist, Robin Dunbar's got a great article in the Financial Times on this. And I would encourage you to look it up. Robin Dunbar, Financial Times, alcohol. Read it. It's just, and he summarizes a lot of the research. So, you know, your friendship network, you know, is crucial to your survival, and alcohol enhances social relationships. That's just a fact. And what I'm hoping to show you is the biology behind that. And it's deep, and also it's deep evolutionary history. Alcohol reduces dementia. It reduces metabolic syndrome. That's the obesity epidemic, renal cell cancer. And the one that'll surprise you is actually death. And this was first discovered in the 1960s, when you could do big computer studies. You had big numbers, and you could separate out the people that drank and didn't smoke. You could have large numbers of people who just drank, didn't smoke. And it's very controversial research, but it's been replicated. So if your relative risk of death is 1, and if you have 1 drink a day, every day, your mortality is better than the person who doesn't drink anything, both men and women. And what is, I find horrifying, but you know, that you can drink up, if you're a man, you can drink 4 drinks a day, every day, and your mortality is better than the guy who doesn't drink. For women, it's less. It's like 2.5 glasses of wine a day. Every day, your mortality is better. Your mortality rate is better than the person who doesn't drink. And all right, so
Dr. Thomson,
please.
This pushing back a little bit on this. It's naturally I'm going to think the more alcohol I have, the more friends I have. But my experience seems to be that alcoholics can be nasty. They can be pushed. They can push people away, and the divorce rates get higher and stuff.
Right.
So where does that come in? Where does the
well, it's a fact. I mean, the problem we're up against, and this is part of what I want to show. The problem we're up against is that they're always, in any biologic phenomena, there are always trade-offs. They're always going to be. There's no drug without side effects. Everything has got their trade-offs here. And you're right. And where the boundary ends for, you know, okay drinking and drinking that leads to nasty drunks and divorces and job losses, you know, it's a fine boundary. But but I think what I'm hoping to show you is to also kind of push back is that we tend to demonize alcohol, and believe me, there's plenty wrong with alcohol. I mean, I'm a psychiatrist. I see the ravages of alcohol every day in my practice. You know, that's, you know, I mean, alcohol. I mean, Mothers Against Drunk Driving is. I mean, they had reason. You know, a lot of drunk drivers kill people. I mean, there's no question but alcohol has a lot of social costs. But I want to show you that its deep evolutionary history is something that I think we have to take account of, because alcohol, you know, is not going to go away. I mean, it just didn't. And actually, one of the original attempts at prohibition was in China back in I think it was like the Yuan dynasty. I mean, alcohol was devastating. They actually tried, you know, 1920 style prohibition in China. But, you know, and 2/3, I can't remember what the number. I mean, alcohol is not going to go away. And there are benefits to alcohol that, you know, historically that have, you know, been there, which I hope to show you. But even currently, moderate drinking can have health benefits.
So it almost seems to be pointing somewhat also to the mismatch theory that you had talked about earlier.
Right.
Like us really smart apes didn't have vehicles or heavy machinery to drive back then.
Right.
Okay.
No,
So
Eric,
we're
I mean,
more-
that's I'm glad you brought that up. That's huge. So, and writers on this also argue that in the past, alcohol tended to be confined to religion or to rituals. There wasn't as widespread drinking. Alcohol was hard to make. There wasn't a lot of it. You know, so that at least in our ancient history, you know, alcohol was not ubiquitous like it is now. And the mismatch theory, yeah, I mean, you know, we can go out and get highly toxic alcohol just around the corner.
So it was much harder to get not only alcohol back then, but also like as we were evolving, but also higher proof of versions of alcohol as we were evolving. So that's even that is kind of a mismatch for our evolution.
Yeah, you and I still have an enzymatic system that's designed just to detoxify the alcohol that's in ripe fruit. We haven't developed any greater capacities. That's why when we drink heavily, we're hungover the next day, because you know it takes a while to metabolize it, and we get buildup of acetaldehyde, and we feel like garbage the next day. We don't sleep well at night, and
yeah, because a liter of wine.
Yeah, think about it. I mean, right? The Roman legionnaires, right? A liter of wine a day.
It must have very much lower alcohol content than I think you and I would be used to these days, perhaps.
Yeah, but it was not alcohol-free beer. I mean, it was, and I'm again, I appreciate it. May be hard to believe, but I actually cut out slides and material. The Vikings were drunk the whole time. I mean, the Vikings were heavy drinkers of tons of alcohol, and they were still very dominant, successful warriors, and their drinking is horrendous. All right, so let's just go, and then we'll. The last part of at least the substances obviously is plant neurotoxins, and then we'll do a couple other things and then try to finish up here. But so the basic biology here is that plants cannot run away. So plants can't run away. So what did they do? Plants evolved chemicals that could manipulate the central nervous systems of animals that would eat them. So that's what happened. Plants evolved neurotoxic pesticides, basically, that would disable the central nervous systems of animals that would try to consume them. And that's what we are abusing. We're using plant neurotoxic pesticides. Why do we start using them in adolescence? Why do we avoid them while we're children? And the reason is that we evolved this complex chemistry that allows us to take in these plant pesticides, control the blood level, and use it for our benefit. And so you want to think of cigarettes and marijuana and cocaine and all these things. Think of it as the Orkin lady, the pesticide, but it's under your control. And if you're interested in this, I can't thank anthropologist Edward Hagen enough. This is a lot of what I'm giving you tonight is based on his work. I encourage you. He's got a fantastic paper. If you just put in Edward Hagen pesticides, it'll pull up. And he's got this wonderful article that reviews all the evidence for what I'm telling you. Just beautiful article. But there's all sorts of evidence for this ability to regulate plant neurotoxins. If a child eats 10 grams of nicotine, it dies, right? When you smoke a cigarette, you get 10 milligrams. Is it 10? Yeah, it's 10 milligrams a child will die, something like that. And when you smoke a cigarette, you get about 0.2 to 0.5, and you control the blood level. Right? And what's the evidence for all of this? Well, we have bitter taste receptors that, taste noxious substances, but we also have specific areas of our dopamine system where wanting is next to that bitter taste. So there's certain bitter tastes that we develop a desire for. We have a vomiting reflex if we get too much. We have aversive learning mechanisms for too much. The blood-brain barrier protects our brain from getting too big a level of these plant neurotoxins. We have certain chemoreceptors that are involved in detoxifying them and controlling them, membrane carrier proteins. There's all sorts of evidence, again, for what I'm telling you, which is that we're designed to take in these substances, take them, use a small amount, control our blood level. The system you have in your liver to detoxify drugs is the cytochrome P450 system. Ancestrally, that is what was used to detoxify plant neurotoxins, the cytochrome P450 system in your liver. But again, just like alcohol, these plants that these plant neurotoxins that we take in and control the blood level, they have positive effects. If it weren't for coffee, I'd have no discernible personality. I mean, I love my morning caffeine. Positive mood, alertness, improves my cognitive performance. It helps me push back against exhaustion. Caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, they decrease insulin resistance, which means your insulin is more effective. The obesity epidemic is insulin resistance. It helps me with fat metabolism. They're all antioxidants. So you can see that there are health benefits to all these plant neurotoxins if we take in a fit bit, if we take in a small amount and control the blood level. We have our own internal marijuana. Again, the endocannabinoid system, and this is what marijuana plants evolved to manipulate. Mammals have their own internal THC. And as you can see, it is involved in all sorts of crucial functions in our bodies. Our endocannabinoid system suppresses cancer, crucial for appetite. Think of your HIV patients, fertility, pain, cardiovascular, in our immune system. And we have two main internal cannabinoids, anandamide and AG2. THC hits the anandamide, the cannabidiols hit the AG2. The endocannabinoids are what help with our stress response. HPA axis is hypothalamic pituitary axis, your stress system. And our internal cannabinoids are involved in motor learning, appetite, pain, pleasure. So when we smoke marijuana, we're augmenting that, right? And again, even though we can take in large amounts, we control the blood level. These are also nutrients. These, in harsh environments that we evolved in, these also provided calories. But the crucial thing that these neurotoxins did is that they could knock out worms. If you remember, if you took biology, the tapeworms and the worms that infect us are able to disable our immune system. So how do we deal with worm infections if our own immune system is not particularly good at handling it? We learn to take in these plant neurotoxins, which would kill the worms and would also keep us from getting infected again. And these are just some of the worms that infect human beings. And a third of the world's population still has to deal with worm infections. So this is not something that's just our ancestral history. Why do we smoke marijuana? Why do we smoke some of these things? Because it turns out that most of these worms, their larval stage is in our lungs. So if we smoke this stuff, we kill them at the larval stage. Also, these plant neurotoxins disable mosquitoes and vectors of obviously things like malaria and other infections.
I had never considered that. I know like so many of us are so far away from having a parasite like a worm in our body, right. And but it still affects a large amount of people these right. days. And that, I never thought about parasites being affected by this stuff.
Yeah, no, I find it just mind-blowing stuff. It's fascinating. And again, a lot of this is Ed Hagen's work. I mean, he went to Africa and he could show that men who smoked nicotine had lower parasite loads.
Oh, wow.
He collected fecal samples, and so you may be getting all sorts of bad stuff from the nicotine. It doesn't help your lungs in some ways, but if you've got infected by worms, they could kill you, and if you can knock them out, that enhances your survival.
So the kind of the calculation maybe some of these folks were making, yes, I might die at a not so young age, but it's a lot longer out than getting worms and being affected by the parasites.
Exactly. So again, what some of the take-home points here, and I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, but two of the crucial take-home points here is that probably the ultimate biologic function of alcohol and the plants that we use and abuse, the ultimate biological function was as antimicrobial, anti-parasite. I think that was their crucial view, their crucial function. But they also had the side benefit of impacting our mood and enhancing social bonding. I think that's the common denominator of all of these substances. Reinforcing social. Oh, and think about the people in the Andes who chew coca leaves. It counters fatigue. It enhances physiologic function, reinforces social bonds, but also it may have been a way of signaling mate quality. Remember, we were going to talk about sexual selection. Okay. And think about the men who try to demonstrate that they can hold their liquor, right? And if you remember sexual selection, what is sexual selection? The females choose, in peacocks, the females choose the male with the biggest, brightest tail. And that's who the female will mate with, the peacock with the biggest, brightest tail. And it turns out the male with the biggest, brightest tail has the lowest parasite load. So the big bright tail is an advertisement for good genes and a good immune system, which is what you'd want your offspring to have. And so these are called handicaps. That big tail on a peacock is a huge handicap, but it advertises that male's genetic immunologic worth. And so one of the theories is that at least in our species, some of substance abuse behavior, particularly by men, is displaying handicaps. They've got such good genes, they can withstand the toxic effects of all these substances. Advertise sexual maturity. Now remember, up until recently, people didn't have birth certificates. How do you advertise that you are sexually mature? Nobody's going to card you. You don't have a birth certificate. You don't know your age. But your ability to handle these toxic substances, as we'll see, was an advertisement of sexual maturity. Women are less likely because these substances are toxic to fetuses. And in the modern world, women can take birth control and schedule the timing of usually can schedule the timing of conception. This guy just went maybe a few beers too far. Failed the peacock tail test, I guess. But what is even wilder, I think, is that there is substantive evidence that this ability to take in these chemicals, these plant neurotoxins, control the blood level of them, and use them as anti-infectious agents is actually the control mechanism is our immune system. And it turns out that when we are infected, we may upregulate they control these substances and the ability to use them as antimicrobials. This is a really important slide, and I want you to look at it closely. I'm sorry it's so busy. If you look at the slide, you will see all the different colors represent different cultures. Okay, and this is one of Ed Hagen's slides. And if you look at the bottom line, that's age. Okay, and what it shows is that regardless of what the substance is or what the culture is, children are not using substances. But then in adolescence, there's a switch, and adolescents start to experiment with or use these substances. And by the time people are in their 20s, they've had or used or experimented with these substances. And this is cannabis, cocaine, alcohol. I can't remember what the other one is. Now, the reason this slide is important is it basically shows that what we're talking about here is a human universal. So this is across multiple cultures, and it shows a basic human nature developmental switch. Children don't abuse these substances, and then they start utilizing them in adolescence into adulthood. And why? Because as children, they can't detoxify these things. Their livers are not big enough. And also they probably at this point in their lives are not infected. But as soon as they start to reach sexual maturity, they start to experiment with and use and utilize these substances. And again, this is just across innumerable cultures. And this is called pharmacophagy. Basically, you basically are eating substances that are medicinal. And we're not the only species. It looks like our Neanderthal cousins did it. These are just some of the other species that have evolved the ability to utilize alcohol and plant neurotoxins to control parasite infections. Carl Linnaeus started to, one of the pressures to classify plants was that up until, really only recently, our only medicines came from plants. And so there was utility in understanding the classification of plants. Now, to get to Eric's point earlier, we've got a tremendous mismatch. The things we have now were rare in the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness. They're now plentiful. We can cultivate stuff that's far more potent. We've got new and dangerous routes, intravenous routes. And everybody knows the increased potency of marijuana, the increased, crack cocaine, heroin, OxyContin, which is like, pure narcotic. And this is one of the things that, overwhelms the system that I've been outlining for you. I want to talk just two more little things about evolutionary biology that are important. Life history theory. All organisms compete to harvest energy and to convert it into reproduction. And selection is obviously going to favor efficient capture and allocation of energy. But all organisms face trade-offs, and they have to prioritize fitness-enhancing, reproductive successful activities. And so there's somatic effort, building a body, reproductive effort, actually competing for mates. Again, somatic effort is resources, acquisition of skills and knowledge, whereas reproductive effort is immediate reproductive success, competition, mate acquisition, reproduction. And so there's trade-offs, present versus future, mating versus parenting, quantity of offspring versus quality. And so you have two things. You have a slow life history like elephants, few offspring, highly invested, fish, very rapid reproduction. So you can see there's a fast life history, a slow life history. One of the things that's unique about humans is that we have both. We can do slow life history, we can do fast life history. And you can see early maturity, early initiating sex early, many partners. There's all sorts of things associated with fast life history versus slow life history. Slow life history for humans, secure attachments, long-term planning, pro-social, quality reproduction versus quantity. Fast life history, insecure attachments, short-term thinking, quantity versus quality, violence, and substance abuse. In our species, substance abuse facilitates a fast life history. With a fast life history, you're vulnerable to that false news, that false signal that substances give that make you feel like it's risk-taking, and also substances mitigate a lot of the stress of harsh environments. and there's a diminished frontal hippocampal connection. So you're running on limbic lobe, not prefrontal cortex. Now, some of you may have seen the movie or the play West Side Story, and the song Officer Krupke, I think, embodies fast life history and substance abuse. Dear kindly Sergeant Krupke, you got to understand, it's just our bringing up key that gets us out of hand. Our mothers are all junkies, our fathers are all drunks. Golly Moses, naturally we're punks. Dear kindly Judge, Your Honor, my parents treat me rough. With all their marijuana, they won't give me a puff. They didn't want to have me, but somehow I was had. Leaping lizards, that's why I'm so bad. And I think this is important because, again, we tend to think of poverty, and fast life histories and in a very diminished way. It's biology. These people are, a fast life history is a way of living. It's a way of basically earning a living. Now, it's usually poverty, but not necessarily. If you look at the biography of President John F. Kennedy, that's a fast life history because of harshness and difficulties in his early upbringing. And I think, we're getting long on time here, and I think I hope I've given you, I hope, things to think about. And the last part of my talk was about something called cliff edge selection. And I think I can, put that aside because the main points I wanted to make, I think I already have. George Richardson, I think, has done some lovely work that people who recover from substance abuse tend to get into slow life histories. Now, do they get into slow life histories, or if they can get into slow life histories, it helps with recovery? Let me just finish up with this. So what is the implication of what I've been saying? And I hope you started to see that the implication is that there, but for the grace of good fortune, go all of us. We should not have a moralizing position about substance use and substance abuse. There should be no blame game. Substance use and abuse is part of the very machinery that we evolved coming out of our early hunter-gatherer life. That we are actually designed for or evolved for alcohol, nicotine, marijuana, caffeine, coca leaves, opium, you name it. We're evolved for that because they were crucial to our survival. They're antimicrobial, they're antiparasitic function. And they were also crucial towards building the ultra-social species that we are. And it's that ultra-sociality that has made us the last surviving hominid and the most successful species on the planet. Try to get into a slow life history, and thank you very much.
Oh, Dr. Thomson, thank you so much for that. There was a lot.
Yes, there's actually too much.
Yeah. I'm working to get my mind wrapped around sort of like a final type of message, and it seems like you kind of said at the end, like we evolved to use these substances because it increased our fitness in the evolutionary term, where we were able to pass on our genes and become, or and ensure the survival of our species. But how does this kind of relate to present day, where we are experiencing so much abuse in these, where people are hooked on it and addicted to it, and it just seems like that's more towards the mismatch of our modern society versus of how we evolved.
Yeah, no, I don't know if you've seen the recent statistics, but cigarette sales are up, alcohol sales are up. Yeah, there's a lot more use and abuse. And my point is that if you take an evolutionary perspective to this, you understand the basis of it. And it gets away from stigmatizing substance use disorders. It gets in the way of moralizing the war on drugs, the incarcerations. I think you work towards acceptance and treatment, and again, all of us are vulnerable. If I think, if I lost my job and suffered a number of deaths in the family, you never know. I could slide into drinking a little bit too much, and next thing you know, I've got an alcohol use disorder.
And my initial thing was like, oh, you're encouraging the use of these things, but that's not really that's not your message at all, is it?
No.
It's just like, hey, this is an understanding of it. This is where we came from.
Right. Well,
So
it's where we came from, and there's still there's still the benefits of these. The benefits are not going to go away.
Mhm.
People are going to be drawn to them because there are benefits. They do enhance social relationships.
Got it.
And that's if you, again, I can't recommend it highly enough. The Robin Dunbar article in the Financial Times on alcohol from a couple of years ago, and he lays it out. And this is just, it's not going to go away. Prohibition doesn't work, won't work.
Yeah.
And I think, in my business, I would obviously, and it's connected to religion, I would prefer to see a scientifically based AA as opposed to the AA NAs that we have now with this, this religious higher power, submit, to a higher power, as opposed to like somebody just put in the chat, Smart Recover, the secular recovery movement, I think is crucial. A secular, scientifically informed substance abuse treatment.
Yeah, I really do like that. Now, the more that I'm thinking and giving some time to digest it, I guess pun somewhat intended, that this knowing where we came from goes really far in helping to destigmatize this, and because I know there are times where I've been struggled with addiction to some substances, and because of the stigma, I would hide it, and it would cause more harm and cause me to pull away from friends and family, just because of the shame that was involved. And I'm pretty darn sure I'm not the only one who has gone through that. The series of or that pathway of thinking.
Yeah, and also people with any kind of mental illness suffer a lot of stress, and these substances are stress relieving. There's no way, and we know the physiology. Alcohol is a great stress reliever.
Yeah,
marijuana, and when you first smoke marijuana, the impact is your HPA axis quiets down.
Yeah, we had a comment in the chat that not only does this understanding of where we came from destigmatize it, but it also fosters empathy towards others as well. And I really like that outlook too.
No, as I said there, but for the grace of good fortune, go all of us.
Yeah.
And the other thing too that I like about it is that we're all sitting on those mechanisms. All of us contain these mechanisms to take in plant neurotoxins and control the blood level. And your 5-year-old doesn't eat the broccoli because it can't digest the plant neurotoxin, but now we can digest it and control it. And if it's weed, we can use it to kill worms that we might have, but also to get a little high and enjoy friends and music and dancing.
Yeah.
Social
Eric,
bonding.
Like we were saying too, about, I think there's in expositories like this, I think sometimes people make the misapprehension that instead of providing an explanation, you're providing a justification for certain things. And I think that all of us, it serves us better for every instance of our lives, whether it be, political or social, or in this case, substance. Having an explanation is certainly better than not having one. And it gives us perspective. It's kind of like when people say things like they don't see color. Well, evolutionarily, that's not true. And, it's not about seeing color, it's about recognizing where we came from. And I think this is another thing like that, where the better understanding we have of ourselves, evolutionarily speaking, because as you were saying, Dr. Thomas, the more that, like, it's everything, right? It's
right.
everything.
No, knowledge is power.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, we have quite a few questions, and I know that we're running a little long, so we'll kind of truncate this a little bit. But one of the questions that I thought was pretty good. Well, real quick, would you mind going back and sort of defining again for us what the slow life history is versus the fast life history is?
Yeah. Slow life history is heavily investing in building a body, building knowledge, building skills, delaying reproduction, few offspring, heavy investment in those offspring. Usually it's associated with, pair bonding, long-term mating. You think of fish. Fish are fast life history. They mature early. They reproduce as fast as they can. It's live fast and die young. And that's slow life history. And one of the unique parts of our species is that we can do both, depending on the environment that we're born into. And if you're born into a harsh, difficult environment, that shifts you towards the fast life history. Usually that's obviously going to be associated with poverty, but not necessarily, but harsh early environments, particularly relationally, that can shift to a fast life history versus a slow life history. And that's, again, a unique aspect of our species, is that we can do both. But again, it goes to, not stigmatizing, the guy who, starts having, has multiple babies with multiple women by the age of 17, and that's morally stigmatized. That's a fast life history, and that young man was set on that course in his childhood. And that's fast life history. That's Sergeant Krupke. That's the beauty of that. And so a lot of this is, again, destigmatizing and pulling moralization and judgmentalness out of things. And fast life history is associated with substance abuse more than slow life history.
The thing I had mentioned in the comments, and I think it was correlated to, is you live a life of a supernova, or you live the life of a brown dwarf. You have fast and furious and you explode into the ether, or it's kind of slow and nurturing. And that's what it reminded me of when you were saying that, is that sort of thing. But yeah.
What are the two again? Brown dwarf, and what's the other one?
And a
supernova
star that would go supernova. So there are a few different types of stars that would go supernova, but one that, some live and burn so hot and fast that they then eventually, sooner than anything else, would go supernova and explode. And others live a very, very long and sort of placid life.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody's interested in good biographies, look at the book William Hamilton. It's years old now, but his first volume of his biography on JFK, called Reckless Youth. It's a tragic story, but JFK's, he clearly had a very rough early development and illnesses, and put him on a fast life history.
There seems to be, and I'm not currently immersed in the research, but there seems to be some evidence that there may be genetic predispositions to alcoholism or substance abuse, like perhaps more than average. Or how does that kind of fit in the model, or is that even something?
No, I think we need to ask a whole new set of questions. Are these genes that, put you at risk for substance abuse disorders, or do you just have a different shuffle of the deck of the genes involved in these basic functions of utilizing substances? I think we have to question, anytime somebody says a genetic defect for alcoholism, I think one would question that. Does somebody just have a shuffle of the deck of the genes that we all have for utilizing substances?
I'm not sure I understand that quite fully.
Okay.
I understand like the shuffling of the genetic deck, but how would that apply to this?
Okay, well, the Han Chinese have genetic variation that makes them susceptible not to be able to tolerate alcohol. Okay.
Okay.
So you might have genetic variation that makes you metabolize the stuff very quickly, which makes you drink more alcohol very easily than another person. Okay, but is that just a variation along a norm? Is that just a variation along a norm, or is it a gene for alcoholism? And I think what we're going to find is more that we've got, variations along a norm, as opposed to like Huntington's disease, where there's a specific gene for the disease.
Exactly.
But I could be wrong on that, obviously. But that's what I think some of this evidence suggests, is that we've got this complicated set of genes that evolved to take in substances and control them. And it may be, I didn't get into it, but it may be operating on a cliff edge, and it doesn't take much for us to slip over into addiction.
Okay, got it.
Does that help, Eric?
Yeah. And, Dr. Thompson, I have a follow-up to that too. I once had, this was an evolutionary biologist I had spoken with this about, who had said that really no trait essentially that has survived into modern day is technically deleterious. It has survived for some reason.
Yes.
That it's got viability. If it didn't actually have any viability,
Right.
it wouldn't be here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, and to illustrate that, it looks like one of the genes for Alzheimer's disease is a gene that actually protects you against diarrheal diseases when you're a child.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Fascinating.
Right. So, no, I think that's a very good point, Trent.
Thank you. Yeah. And then I had another question in here that I found in chat, which I thought was kind of funny and interesting too. Speaking about the most successful species and talking about mankind in that way. And, I feel, yes, it's almost has to be the case in a way that we are, in the way that we've conquered the world. But this is a question that says, are we the most successful species? I would have thought that would be mosquitoes or cockroaches or
No, I think it's cockroaches.
else.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah.
I meant to say they were the most successful hominid. I'm glad you caught me on that. No, I think cockroaches. Sure. I think it's cockroaches.
Right.
But it's probably viruses, actually.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
Something with the longevity and ability to take
Yeah,
advantage of life.
Yeah, and somebody put up a great line in the chat: "Success is in the eye of the organism." Right.
Yeah.
Oh man,
very much so.
Good point.
Do conspiracy theories? We're kind of going a little bit off topic, but this is kind of a question that that is connected to that dopamine feedback loop that we talked about, and how it's kind of related to addiction. Do conspiracy theories and that kind of thinking have a similar pathway, perhaps in the brain, as some of these drugs or these drugs or alcohol or substances?
I don't know, but that's a good question, because they've got to be reinforcing. So one could postulate it, sure, that they in some way are reinforcing or bring some pleasure or some. Yeah, that's a good point.
One of the other questions that we got in the chat was talking about Hagen, that researcher that wrote the paper about pesticides, less ingesting pesticides. Did he account in this paper? Did he account for factors such as perhaps the people who can afford to smoke being more wealthy, and so being more wealthy would contribute them to have less parasites in general? Like, were those kind of factors taken into account?
I don't believe so, but he was researching, at a sort of laying out the biochemistry of it. I'd have to look at the paper again. I don't remember there being, he's got an excellent discussion in there, and this is why I would encourage people to read the paper. I mean, I think it's a brilliant paper, but he's also got a very good section in there about why men and women abuse at different amounts, the difference between the sexes. But in the he studied hunter-gatherer tribe in Africa, or just a sort of, I don't know what they call a minor horticultural society, and where he was studying the men's use of nicotine and measuring parasite load. It was not in a, it wasn't in a tribe or a group that had great disparities of wealth, is my memory.
Sure, we've got one here. Is CBD snake oil? Like, does it have a actual effect in the same way that these other substances have, or is it kind of all bunk?
No, I mean, I think we're going to learn more. I mean, I think CBD does have a role in therapeutics. I think that's it, but you know, it's hard to separate out good quality research from hype. But people are trying to do, you know, placebo-controlled trials with CBD, and particularly, I think, for the control of pain. So I think you're going to find, you know, it's going to take time, but I think you're going to find some genuine therapeutic uses for CBD. But the problem you have to be concerned about is the CBD you get on the market these days usually has some THC in it, and at least in my business, you know, people, the people I work with tend to be sensitive to THC. THC doesn't help them and exacerbates their illnesses.
Dr. Thomson, thank you so much for joining us and doing this
again.
evening.
No, thank you all for having me. Thank you for your patience. I knew I thought I might be able. I thought I might be able to get it all in, but it was a little bit too much. And I appreciate your
fool's errand, my friend. I saw over 140 slides. I'm like, no freaking way.
But I got it.
It was a valiant effort.
When I gave it, I got it in an hour the first time, but you know. And I actually, I know you're not going to, I know this may be hard to believe, but I actually was taking out stuff all the time. But again, thank you, because I just think everybody ought to have as much of this as possible, because I think it's interesting, it's important, and and again, just thank you as always for having me.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Wow, what a dense and fantastic RfRx. I really enjoy that. I've said this a couple of times, especially about Dr. Andy's talk. So I'm gonna have to watch this again on our YouTube channel, because this is a lot of stuff. But this isn't gonna be our last one. You might have thought, oh my gosh, you guys are going out with a dense textbook. You're never gonna do this again. But no, we've got another one coming up next week. Next week, I kind of helped come up with this title, so I'm a little proud of it. RfRx California Raisin, growing up fundamentalist and leaving it all behind, with Alexis Erlin, Alexis Erlin, I apologize. So here's the description. Growing up in a fundamentalist religious households, the trauma that children experience due to the belief systems of their parents can last a lifetime and be very difficult to work through. Alexis will talk about how she got herself out of the fundamentalist belief system and the path she took to discovering her own identity. She'll provide some helpful tips on reflecting back upon the past, working through identity crises, finding your own parenting style, and dealing with estranged relationships. So that's going to be a good one. I know that I can relate to quite a bit of that myself.
Just so you're all aware, all of these RfRx recordings can be found on the YouTube channel. YouTube channel is going to be found in the chat. Topical questions, comments, inquiries can all be sent to another email address, which you will also find in the chat. And you can find our blog at a link, and our podcast. So all of these can be accessed in a lot of different ways. Please send them out to as many people as you think might be interested in them. I messaged someone just tonight who I thought might be interested in this presentation that I, hadn't reached out to in a long time. So just reach out to friends, family, loved ones, anyone that you think that would be interested in our content, and hopefully we can help. You can also follow us on social media. We got Facebook page and the support groups page. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We have a newsletter. All of these things are going to be linked. The newsletter, by the way, provides news for RFR and recent RfRx resources. And we also have the recently published videos and recently published blogs there. So check them out. And you can always reach out to one of us for questions, things of that nature.
Excellent. Trent, thank you so much. Folks, we want to hear your feedback on this. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll like we do every day or every RfRx. And while this poll is running, I'm going to bring on Phil Sessions because, you haven't probably met Phil. He is a fantastic dude. He's a board member for Recovering from Religion. And I would love to hear what he has to say on this and kind of wrap it up. Phil, are you there, my friend?
I am indeed. Thanks, Eric, so much.
Oh my gosh, your voice just turns me to better every time. I love it.
Oh goodness, but good night. But thank you, Dr. Thomson, Andy, for sharing this talk on today to really get into that evolutionary background of how drugs affect us, how it's used in the past, and how we're really made, as receptors for all of these different substances that are in the world. And I'll never, I need to try to trademark the term of the Milky Way Bar and Grill, to try to launch this. And I'll call all my servers comets, since they were carrying the alcohol, they were the first real servers of a kind in that scenario. So that would totally be a thing. But what I took away from this talk is so much that I'm going to have to probably rewatch it as well for some pieces that I had missed. But it was really, looking at it from an academic standpoint and really, for me, destigmatizing, the study around these different substances, because, for those of us that grew up in the United States, I grew up in Texas, on the southern side of things, and we had the DARE program, for example, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education. And so I still remember writing in the 4th grade, we were forced to write an essay about how, we either conquered drugs. It could be a fiction or nonfiction story. And I fun fact, humble brag, I ended up winning that essay contest. Thank you very much. I had to read it in front of the school, as a matter of fact, in the 4th grade. So just random aside there, that was a thing. But when I think about how much those programs and that type of rhetoric have really stigmatized even talking about substances, and how much that's really affected so many of our lives. And, thinking along those lines, how has that stigmatization affected, research into new medicines? How further would we be along the way if we didn't have those stigmas in place? Even improving our current medical knowledge, how's it affected public policy from, declaring, as a Schedule I drug for marijuana and stopping research of what those elements could be for magic mushrooms and everything. There's so much information out there, and to me, it's been stopped prematurely just because of these feelings, these stigmas, this unknown presence, or, putting it as the other of society. How many folks are in jail for people of color and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds due to the public policies that have been put into place in order to keep people away from this, rather than looking at it from an academic standpoint, understanding the way that our bodies work, understanding the way these substances work with our bodies, finding a better way to control what that effect is, what is the best policy we could put forward, what's the best advice that we can give to people. But we can't do that if we have a lack of information due to our own stigma that we're putting around the subject that's stopping that research from going forward in the first place. And so that's why I really enjoyed this talk. And I'm not sure if you all saw it before. This is not Andy's first rodeo to RfRx. And so some of his other talks include like the evolutionary view on depression, happiness in the time of the plague, and why we believe in gods. And so you can find those on the YouTube for Recovering from Religion. So search that up and find those out. But to sum it up, it really came down to something that Andy said right there at the end. As we get to understand these things more, about how it's affected us over time in the development of our species, it helps us to ask a lot of questions. And hopefully, as that stigma goes down, we start to lose some of the hesitancy around asking those questions and being able to explore that more. And so, once again, I just want to thank you, Dr. Thomson, for coming on and sharing this wonderful topic with everyone and the audience today. And so, for other people that may not know a little bit of my background, I love volunteering is my thing. I love it. I could talk about it all day. All day, every day. Trust me, in Austin, San Antonio, I'm all about that life for those experiencing homelessness and so many other causes that are around in the world. And so if you'd like to volunteer for Recovering from Religion to help, being troll smashers to helping with the helpline, there's so many different opportunities that you can do to volunteer. And so if you want to it's not a fit for everybody, but if it's something that's for you and you have the time that you like to dedicate to it, then please visit us at recoveringfromreligion.org, click on volunteer, and there you'll see all the positions that are there, all the questions that go with it to get that process started. And if you enjoyed what we do, we love it to death that people have enjoyed RfRx, and who knew that it would grow to such mountaintops. That it really has. It's been an amazing journey, all the way from the start of the pandemic, really. And so if you'd like to help contribute to those efforts, to the helpline, to everything that Recovering from Religion does, please visit us at recoveringfromreligion.org and click on that donate tab if you care to put a few bucks that way. Every little bit counts. Trust me, every little bit counts. And so it doesn't have to be a huge amount, but if it's something that you feel inclined to do, please consider do so. And with that, I will not take up any more of your time on this lovely evening. Y'all take care. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll send it back to you, Eric.